Television has been around for just about 100 years now. For instance, the first television broadcast in history took place in 1928, and regular broadcasting wouldn't start until 13 years later when NBC and CBS began a somewhat regular schedule in 1941. In the 80 years since, television has had its ups and downs, but along the way there has been one goal in the mind of every network executive across the country. That goal was to achieve market domination through any means necessary. No one network, be it NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, or anyone else, have ever been able to accomplish complete domination of the top of the market, and it's inconceivable that it ever will happen considering the number of shows only increases as the years go on. Don't get me wrong, this is a good thing, as much like the Sith rule of two, competition allows only the best and most powerful to exist. But despite no network ever being able to obtain the omnipotent status of a Sith Lord, almost every major network has attempted the power grab at least once. Some attempts almost resulted in the dream status only to miss out by the smallest of margins, while others are barely a footnote in history. I'm going to look at these failures in this video because, well, it's interesting to me, and because market domination is never going to be achieved by one network, especially with streaming services existing. The first instance of this comes to us in 1950, the first year viewership ratings were ever tracked by the Nielsen Company. NBC would nail down 7 shows inside the top 10, and the 6 highest rated shows all belonged to the network. NBC would go on to repeat this feat just 2 years later, but in more of a reverse sweep, capturing shows 4 to 10, while CBS took home the top 3. NBC wouldn't reach this level of dominance for another 40 years, when they once again pulled down 7 shows in the top 10 in the year 1996. This year was the height of NBC's fabled must-watch TV block, which consisted of Friends, Seinfeld, ER, and more, which I have touched on briefly in a previous video. Since 1996, NBC has been able to put out top-quality programming, but never again to this level. ABC would get in on the fun in 1976, pulling down the top 6 shows and 7 of 10 overall. This was all on the backs of Laverne and Shirley, Three's Company, and Charlie's Angels, which all landed inside the top 5. Just 2 years later, in 1978, the network would once again hold 70% of the top 10. What makes 1978 especially interesting is that in 1978, ABC put out 3 new shows that managed to land inside the top 10, but they still weren't able to have a lineup deep enough to fully push out CBS and NBC. To go along with this, during these 2 seasons, ABC would actually average over 25% higher ratings than either network. This strong showing with just 2 years separating them had a lot of promise for future domination, especially considering that 6 shows debuted to a top 10 placement between the 2 years. Despite this, ABC would never be able to realize their full potential, and in the 40 years since, they've never been able to even match their previous results, let alone improve on them. Those 5 seasons would be NBC and ABC's only attempts at a clean sweep of the top 10 shows in a year. To make matters worse, capturing 70% of the top 10 has actually been done quite a few times throughout history, and it isn't actually all that out of the ordinary. See, I'm not looking for run-of-the-mill accomplishments here. No, I'm looking for something more. Something unobtainable. I want only the best and most dominant lineups in history, and to do that, I need to leave NBC and ABC behind, because when it comes to dominating the ratings charts, CBS is the network of prophecy. CBS was created in the same year as NBC, but despite this, CBS would fail to impress statistically and would continuously lose out to NBC in the charts. In the first 5 years ratings were tracked, CBS would rank second, while NBC pulled down the top spot in the rankings. This would all change in 1956, when CBS would lay down one of the most impressive years in television history, when they captured 9 of the 10 top shows in the nation, only missing out on the mythical sweep by a single show. That show was NBC's The Perry Como Show, which stole the 9th ranking in the nation, effectively ending CBS's bid for an undefeated season. CBS would take just 6 years to recover from this defeat, quietly licking their wounds while planning their next attack. This plot would come to fruition in 1962, when they pulled in 80% of the top 10, a notable step back from their first try at the record, losing 1 more spot than their previous attempt. This was due to ABC and NBC stealing the 8th and 4th spot respectively. This year is actually very impressive statistically, because when you zoom out, CBS held 18 of the top 22 shows in the nation, only allowing 4 outsiders to even catch a whiff of the top of the charts. But it still wouldn't be enough as they failed to capture 100% of the top 10. CBS had a very strong catalog of shows in 1962. Knowing this, the network decided to only add 2 new shows to their lineup for 1963. This would come in the forms of Petticoat Junction and My Favorite Martian. These shows would both land inside the top 10, and they had no way of knowing it at the time, but this year would be the most dominant performance in network television history. That's right, 1963 would be the closest any network would ever come to breaking the record. During this year, ABC's The Beverly Hillbillies repeated as the top-ranked show in the nation, while The Dick Van Dyke Show moved up 6 spots to capture 3rd place, along with 8 CBS shows moving up in the rankings. During 1963, CBS managed to capture 9 of the top 10 rated shows in the nation. The only blemish on an otherwise flawless year was NBC's Bonanza, which took home the 2nd place spot. Now I know what you're thinking. I just said CBS got 9 of 10 in 1956. How is 1963 more impressive or a better year at all? Well, in 1956, CBS falls apart once we leave the top 10. From ranks 11 to 15, they lost 3 more slots, only capturing 11 of the top 15 shows in the nation. History would actually repeat itself in the year 1973, as CBS would once again capture 90% of the top 10, but just like in 1956, they only managed to land 11 of the top 15 slots, again ceding 3 slots from 11 to 15 to other networks. 1956, 1963, and 1973. These years stand alone in the history books as the only instances where a network managed to gaze upon glory only to fall short in the final hour. Among these 3, 1963 is the only season to hold strong and not falter once we leave the top 10. CBS would capture every spot from 11 to 15, meaning that they only gave up a single slot within the top 15 rankings. This would sadly be the closest we ever came to seeing a network obtain total domination of the market. Just like what happened with ABC, CBS was never able to improve upon their previous work, despite having put up some of the best years in history just a couple of years apart. But for one glorious year, CBS tasted perfection, only to vomit from the flavor. They only ever managed to hold down 9 of the top 10 shows in the nation, and the other networks only managed 7. We will never again see a network attempt this feat of domination. This is due to the vast diversity within network television, which doesn't even account for the rating streaming pulls in, which the Nielsen company now also tracks. CBS tried something crazy, and it almost worked. I mean, during this period of time from 1956 to 1973, CBS averaged over 6 shows within the top 10, giving sole claim to this era to the network. And that's about all I got. CBS would come close, but in the end they just couldn't cut it. I highly doubt any network will ever again come as close as CBS did, let alone that network actually accomplishes the feat. Anyway, I've been Semantics, and as always, have a great day today, everybody.